Welcome to On the Mark with Peter Buckley and Mark O'Donnell. Our podcast is dedicated to helping Christians target the right priorities in their apostolic and interior lives.
Well, hello and welcome to On the Mark. I'm Peter Buckley, your host, and I'm happy to introduce once again Mark O'Donnell. Mark, welcome and Happy New Year to you, and thank you for joining us once again.
Well, thank you for having me, Peter. This is great. We're here at Arnold Hall on a workshop with 33 professional men, and so this is a great topic that we're going to be covering today on building better relationships in the new year. So I'm looking forward to discussing it with you.
That's great. I'm hopefully having a good time there. I am not there. I am here working away, trying to keep this economy moving single-handedly.
Exactly.
But that's okay. You work in those relationships. I noticed something today. Today, as we were indicating, is at the beginning of the new year, and I noticed a post from Arthur Brooks. Arthur Brooks is presently a professor at the Harvard Business School, and for a great number of years, he was head of the American Enterprise Institute, and he's written a number of books, has commented on, or his, frequently referenced in articles, magazines, and so forth. But I noticed a post that he put up on X today, or the other day, having to do with the beginning of the year, the customary idea for most people is, okay, let's come up with some resolutions and so forth. And he somehow connected this to this bucket list notion. And he noticed that when he was 40, he created a bucket list, things that he wanted to achieve. And he wrote them down. And he said, among those, he enumerated a handful of them, but among those are write books and columns about serious subjects, teach at a top school, travel to give lectures and speeches, maybe lead a university or think tank, and a few other. And he hit all of those. And he discovered this when he was 50. He discovered this list. The thing that he realized was he wasn't any happier at 50 than he was at 40, even though he attained all of those goals, right? Because of course you keep reaching for the next rung on the ladder. And then he goes on. It's actually a worthwhile post for if anybody wants to take a look at it on X. It's Arthur Brooks. But then he says ultimately the source of happiness can be found in what we're going to discuss today, which is faith, family, and relationships. And so that's really the core and the essence of all happiness is these fulfilling relationships. And so as we do discuss this a bit today, I want to go back to something we talked about before. It's a book written by Peter Seawald called Salt of the Earth, where he's interviewing Pope Benedict XVI before he was Pope, when he was Cardinal Ratzinger. And he explains how all our relationships are based on and flow out of our relationship with God. And then corollary to that, of course, is the better our relationship with God, the better our human relationships will be. Family members, colleagues at work, and so forth. But that, of course, isn't easy, right? I mean, building a relationship with God is not that easy. So let's start with that, if we can, Mark. How do we do that? What's your advice on this fundamental point of building a solid relationship with God?
Great question, Peter. I think it's simple, but it's also hard to do. What we have to do is we just have to accept God's revelation, which is basically Christ, and we have to study Christ's words and observe his actions, learn from his actions. And so we need a plan to read the New Testament, ponder it, and then try to implement it in our lives. And I notice in the Gospels, there's different scenes where Jesus gets up early in the morning, goes off and prays. And I think that that's a great time for us to do this. That half hour, first thing in the morning, you can go down in your living room, go through a chapter or two of the New Testament, maybe read a commentary on it, then ponder it, pray about it, ask God to help you understand it. And ultimately, what that's going to do is it's going to prompt us to start to live the commandments, right? Because in the gospel, Christ is always telling us, if you love me, keep my commandments. If you keep my commandments, my Father and I are going to come and dwell with you. We're going to be with you. So that's kind of a little bit of the litmus test, so it's not just an academic exercise. So we start to act on the word. We start to try to live his commandments. And as we do that, the space within us for God increases. We become more aware of who we are and those around us. And that's really the first step. Okay, that's the first step. And so what is a metric? I always like to look at things, being a loyal son of MIT. I always like to be able to measure things if I can, even though that may not be very appropriate in the areas of faith, and it's not in some cases, no question about it. But I think one way to really help you to build this relationship and to know if it's working, right, is uh, encouragement. Encouragement is the primary way in which we show our love for other people. So we can look at ourselves and we can say, are we encouraging others, or are we always judging and evaluating them in a negative or not positive light? And if we look at that and we just ask ourselves today, how many encouraging conversations did I have with anyone? All right, we'll have bad days. Maybe we don't have any on some days, but over the course of a month, if we don't have any encouraging conversations with others, I think that's a very good sign and for us that we need to change.
That's interesting. You often hear people say to actually become kind of a merchandising industry, this idea of what would Jesus do when confronted with a dilemma or a difficult decision. I've always wondered about that. I mean, is this the best litmus test for us to apply as we look for a guide for our daily actions?
I don't really think so. It sounds nice, but the reality is that Jesus has already acted. He's already done what he was sent to do. We are different persons than Jesus, hence we are going to fulfill God's will in a different way than Jesus would. I mean, that may sound a little rebellious or harsh, but I think it's an important distinction to make. God has created each of us in his image and likeness, but we're all different. The saints are all different. Thank God. And in the book, The Salt of the Earth, again, going back to what you were referring to, when the Cardinals asked how many ways are there to God by Peter Seawald, he says, as many as there are people. And then he goes on to say, certainly Christ is the way, but we each follow him along a separate, very personal path. And that's what makes our lives so important, and the exercise of our freedom so important and impactful for all of humanity. I often think about real estate, since I'm selling real estate or trying to these days. And, when you're out there selling real estate, oftentimes we'll have group showings or open houses, and there'll be all sorts of buyers that will come through and look at a house. But there's only one optimal buyer for the house, and that's the one who makes, the best offer. And the one who makes the best offer is the one who is looking the hardest for the house that really fits their needs. So they're making this effort, right, to go out and look at 10, 20, 30, 40, even 50 houses just to find the right house that's going to fit their needs. And that's the kind of attitude we need in building a relationship with Christ. We have to seek him. We have to keep looking for Christ over and over and over again, right? And that takes place primarily in the Gospels, and then in asking the Holy Spirit to inspire us. So seek Christ as you would seek to find a home. And then you'll be willing, okay, I have to overcome obstacles. There are going to be obstacles because Jesus tells us, right? He says, take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am meek and humble of heart. You will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy, my burden is light. Nevertheless, they are still a yoke and a burden, and they're going to hurt at times. It's the same thing in house hunting. It's like, I don't want to get out and go look at this more and more. I just want to go ahead and settle for something that may not be optimal. And no one really wants to do that. I just picked that because it's a very physical, visible example that people, I think, can relate to.
No, I think it's a good example.
Yeah.
Now that you killed merchandise sales for all these poor Christian camps, all these poor kids wearing their WWJD bracelets and T-shirts, let's just kind of get back to this idea of relationships again. And what I'm hearing you say, I think, is that God is trying to provoke us to use our freedom more aggressively than maybe we would have imagined. And on one hand, that sounds daunting, but on the other hand, that sounds pretty exhilarating. And so, how does investing in this relationship with God help us in our relationship with others? Because to me, anyway, it's not that clear or obvious.
Sure. I mean, when we try to follow Jesus closely, we become more like him. When we become more like him, we have a much greater capacity to engage with others, to work with others. Look at what Jesus does with the apostles. He calls them, he guides them over a course of 3 years, he educates them, and he has to constantly go back and bring them back. I mean, what's striking to me, one scene in the gospel is very striking. Are there actually two scenes? There are two miraculous catches of fish. There's the initial one, right? When Peter and Andrew and James and John are there fishing, and Jesus preaches and then says, "Go out, cast out into the deep," and Peter says, "We fished all night," so forth and so on. Anyway, there's this huge catch. Peter says, "Depart from me, for I'm a sinful man." And Jesus says, "No, from now on, you're going to be catching men." Then fast forward 3 years after Jesus is crucified, the apostles don't really know what to do, right? So they go back and go fishing again. They're kind of lost, right? I mean, no one would really know exactly what to do, right? I mean, Jesus is gone. So, and yet he appears there on the shore and he's got a fire going. He yells out, "Young men, do you have any fish?" And they say no. And then John recognizes, okay, it's the Lord. He says, "Cast to the right, you'll find some." And of course, they find 153. They drag them to the shore. So Jesus is constantly going out and helping us over and over again. So it's kind of like this vocation is not a one trick pony. It's not just I'm just going to say yes once and it's going to be all set. It's an iterative process, back and forth, and we slowly move forward with that. So as we're doing that, we grow in patience. And patience, I think, is the critical virtue we need to become saints. And our Lord tells us that, by your patience, you'll win your souls. He knows it's going to be hard. And he shows us through his passion how to be patient. He takes on all the suffering that would crush any ordinary man. And I don't mean just from a physical standpoint. I mean, because Jesus fell 3 times and he would not have made it to the top without the soldiers helping him to get up and go on, and Simon of Cyrene helping him at some point, right? But I mean interiorly, that he's not lashing out at his persecutors, that he's enduring this suffering because he knows that good is going to come out of it. And in that process, he starts to redeem everyone around him. And they start to observe this and they start to say, whoa, this is incredible. This guy hasn't done anything wrong. And yet he just keeps going and going about his business of carrying the cross. I remember when I was laid off from one of my corporate jobs, it was 9/11, and there were like 40 of us laid off at the same time that, the planes were going into the World Trade Center. It was complete chaos at work. But anyway, after that point, I had some anxiety about what am I going to do now? I'm over 40. They hired me back on an hourly basis to complete some projects, but I didn't know how long that was going to last. And I remember going to confession during that week, and just telling the priest about it. And he said to me, he said, "Look, Jesus suffered anxiety in the agony in the garden. He can help you with your anxiety if you pray to him." And that always stuck with me. And that's what I mean about observing what's going on. He's already gone through the suffering that we're going to have to confront at different points in our life. And right now, anxiety seems to be a huge thing among young people. And a lot of that could be relieved if they just had a relationship with Christ and the bread and the word. They observed his actions. They asked him for help in their daily struggles. He could help them do that so that they could then endure as he endured, and he help you through. So I think that helps in all these relationships. Patience is so key, right? How many times people get upset because someone said something in the wrong tone, or they didn't show up on time for an event they were supposed to show up on, or they didn't bring food or whatever to the, I mean, there are dozens of reasons, we get upset about what other people. And Christ will help us overlook all that and just be patient and look at the positives. And this isn't like theory, academics. This is reality. So that's where to me, patience is really critical benefit of trying to be a saint. And that flows into all these relationships.
Yeah, I mean, beyond it was very good. And coming off this holiday period where many people were with friends and families, I'm sure patience was tested at time, and so it's probably
Oh yeah.
a very resonant message given this time of year. But beyond patience, which of course is very vital, uh, what other virtue can we focus on to grow in the new year? What other ways can, as virtues, as ways to help us build stronger relationships in 2025?
Well, I would suggest investing in relationships and people rather than things and money. Spend more time with people, less time pursuing your own personal projects, including work. We certainly need to work. We need to make a living, but we also need to live temperance in our work. We don't want to idolize the work of our hands. And St. John Cardinal Henry Newman talks about that in one of his homilies. It's called Giving Glory to God in the Pursuits of the World. And he makes the point, he says, pursuits are of our own choosing. They're not imposed upon us like obligations. We can choose not to pursue or to pursue our own interests relentlessly with our own time. And so that's where I think we need to reallocate time to people. And specifically, what do we do with these people? Well, this is like another metric that we can use to help us. Have conversations with people that last more than 5 minutes. A real conversation lasts more than 5 minutes. It isn't just kind of a nice, exchange of pleasantries. In order to do this, we have to be interested in people and interested in their lives. But that's what Christ will help us to do. Yeah. I mean, being at Opus Dei has helped me a lot because I work a lot with married men and I try to get together with them on a monthly basis, help them with their spiritual lives. And sometimes I don't really have any advice to give them, but I'm praying for them. And just the act of going out, listening to them, praying for them is very beneficial for me as well as for them. And that's what it's about. You want to get a little bit of a structure in your life so that you can say, okay, this last month, how many conversations of over 5 minutes did I have? And if it's a goose egg, that's a great area for resolution. I'm going to try to have 1 or 2 or 5 this month, and without torturing other people. Obviously, if they don't want to have a
January
conversation.
30th, you're grabbing somebody after mass.
Yeah, that's right. Hey,
Hey,
I don't know you, buddy, but I really would just like to sit down and talk for a couple
got to
minutes.
put something on the scoreboard here.
Yeah.
Can I grab you for 5 minutes?
Yeah, try 6 minutes. But I think that's how we help. That's how we help others. I mean, there's a scene again. We go back to the Passion of Jesus. We look at his life, and there's the Stations of the Cross, and one of my favorite stations, which was not a favorite station, for many years ago, but it became kind of a favorite station, was when he meets the women who are wailing and crying because of what he's going through, and he stops and he talks to them and he tries to encourage them, right, and help them. And Romano Guardini has a great comment about that. He says most people would just go walk past them kind of blind, stupefied, trembling in pain. But Christ doesn't do that. Instead, he speaks with them. He goes on fulfilling his vocation, no matter how miserable he feels. And I think that is very helpful for us because we have to realize it's okay to feel miserable from time to time. It's okay. You're not way off. But Christ is going to help you now to keep going. You can't just keep running away from that. Every time something is hard, we have to say, well, I don't want to do this now. I don't want to do that now. Because then you have no foundation in your life, right? And so I think he can help people with that. And I think if they look at conversations as a metric for their own growth.
Yeah, I think that's very good. It's concrete and it's good, measurable. In many of our previous podcasts, we've always had a focus or try to relate our subject to evangelization generally, and then more specifically, Professional life in the workplace, how does our relationship with God impact those relationships with our professional colleagues in the workplace? How can it help us improve in these relationships?
Well, I think it helps us to live patience better, but it also helps us to be a better listener. I mean, Jesus obviously can read people's hearts and minds, and we can't do that, but we can be more attuned to listening to what they say. Just like he's listening there to the wailing women and trying to comfort them, by becoming a friend of Jesus, tapping into that strength through meditation on his word and reception of the Eucharist, we become better listeners. We'll be less self-absorbed. Our colleagues will notice this because we'll make time for them. We'll show an interest in their lives in simple ways, simply by asking questions and listening. And I think that's a critical thing that's lost. Our work colleagues, they need companionship, which then can lead to friendship, but definitely need companionship. And we have to be companions and good companions at first. And for some of them, that will lead to friendship. For others, it won't. And for most of them, it's not going to lead to friendship. But they need us to go out and to encourage them once and to help them. And a lot of that is by listening to them. I mean, when you look at these last podcast we did at Arnold Hall for that men's conference, at the end of it, we were talking about that scene in the gospel about the Gerasenes. The demoniac is there, and Jesus goes out there and cures him. And then, the swine run over the cliff, and the owners come by and ask Jesus to leave. And, he leaves, and the guy wants to get in the boat with him, the demoniac, and he says, no, go and tell all your friends and family about what we've done, how God has had mercy on you. We have to realize a lot of professional environments are like the Gerasenes. I mean, the only reason Jesus went out there was to cure that man, and the only reason, that we're with our colleagues is really to help them get to heaven. We're working with them, we're doing projects together with them, but all that's going to pass away. And we'll go on to different jobs, they'll go on to different jobs. But while we're together, we want to try to help them. I remember when I was first starting out in corporate finance, working at General Cinema Corp, Chestnut Hill, I used to go down to Wall Street and meet with investment bankers, and they would wine me and dine me and so forth. And there are some guys from Lehman Brothers that wanted me to do business with them. They take me out to dinner, and anyway, we started talking about personal life and so forth. And they asked me about my personal life, and I told them about my vocation in Opus Dei, what I was trying to do, and how I was trying to sanctify my work. And one of them just guffawed. He just like, what? How do you sanctify what you do? And he was kind of laughing about it. And I say, well, I try to offer it to God. I try to do it honestly. I try to pray. And well, how do you pray? And somehow we started talking about Saint Josemaria, and I talked to him about the way. And I said, I'll send you a copy of it. So like the next week, I sent him a copy of it, and week after that, we had our market update call. And he said, hey, I shared the book you gave me with some of the traders here down on the desk, and they all said I was taking this relationship thing way too far. And I got to cut back. So, I mean, I appreciate you sending it to me. It is pretty interesting, but I don't know where we go from here on that one.
Let me take you to a ball game. We'll wrap this thing up. Yeah.
But it was just, and it's kind of, you can look at that and say, this is hopeless, right? And of course, Lehman Brothers collapses. The whole, all the shenanigans that were going on, and they're not alone. I mean, businesses collapse for a variety of reasons, but there's so much that needs to be fixed behind the scenes in institutions like that it's just overwhelming. You can say, oh, I can never realign this with the truth or have any impact. But the fact is you can have an impact on the people, because the people that were working there with me are now at other firms or other places, but hopefully they'll have taken something positive from our interaction. And so I think that's how you do it. And see, the thing, Peter, is that none of this is ever broadcasted. No one ever hears about this. And that's why it's important that lay people talk about it amongst ourselves to encourage each other that, yeah, this is our space. Just like the priest has this in the church and he's supposed to preach the word of God and celebrate the sacraments. Professional men and women are called upon to sanctify family life, but also professional work. And that's really the focus. Opus Dei's focus its primary focus was professional work initially, and then extended to everything after that. But that was the hinge of our sanctification. So it's easy to get discouraged because you don't get a welcome reception. And just think about, well, look at what happened to Jesus and the Gerasenes. He wasn't welcome. So this is kind of like the Gerasenes. People were concerned about, holding on to the money, holding on to the swine. I don't want to lose that stuff. That's my livelihood, So I just think no one's focused on the space, and this is our call, and it's natural because this is where we fit. We don't really fit, I don't know, running a Bible study. Maybe we do, but we fit in this space.
That's good. Why don't we wrap it up there, Mark? Kicked off the year, I think, with a really very helpful discussion on how we can build better relationships. Thank you again for what you shared. Focus again on putting real priority on spending some time in the New Testament. I think, again, in a concrete way, are we having meaningful and immeasurable conversations with people, beyond just these 5 minutes, and recognizing that, where we are is where God wants us to be, and to use that as a real opportunity to be helping others with their lives and help bring Christ to them.
Definitely.
So thank you for that. I wish you a great new year, great 2025. Hope it's a good one for On the Mark.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it. I think there's a lot of interesting topics we can discuss.
Excellent. Well, thank you once again, and thank you all for joining us once again on the Mark.
Thanks for listening to On the Mark with Peter Buckley and Mark O'Donnell. If you enjoy our podcast, be sure to follow us on Apple Podcasts and Spotify to be notified every time Peter and Mark release a new episode. And visit us on the web at onthemark.show.